Ryan here. Welcome back to another episode of PraiseCharts Live. It's been a little while since I've been with you, and today I think we're going to have a very fascinating discussion with an author and director of a convention, worship leader, worship pastor, so many experiences with this man, David Manner, who has written a book, Better Sundays Begin on Monday. I mean, so many times, those of us who even come to Praise Charts, we're planning songs, we're putting songs together, putting people together. We've got to get that Sunday done with, and then boom, it's Monday. We're exhausted. And Tuesday, what do? We're just start thinking about the next Sunday again. And we just keep going through the cycle over and over and over. And of course, sometimes it's great, but sometimes it can be exhausting. And sometimes we just need to take some time to look back on what actually happened on Sunday on a regular basis and think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we can improve and grow in very deep ways. So this is a great book full of 52 short chapters. They're literally like a page or two each, made for you and your team to just take some time to methodically go through and take some time to think about what we're doing on our Sundays. So we're going to just kind of dive in with David. He's right here with me. Let's just go right in with him. We'll talk about the book and find out his heart behind it and even dive into a couple of chapters and see where that takes us. So let's go with David Manner. Here we go. David, welcome to Praise Charts Live. Nice to have you here.
Hey, Ryan. Good to see you, man. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So where are you? You look like you're in some kind of like basement cave, or is it the man cave? Is that where you're dialing from?
This is actually my office.
It is.
That's actually my office in our convention offices here in Topeka, Kansas, in the Midwest.
All right. Well, and hey, and so apparently you're the executive director for the Kansas-Nebraska Convention of Southern Baptists. Is that right? That's what you're currently
That's correct.
serving at?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I've been here almost 22 years
Yeah.
in several different roles, and just in a little over a year ago, moved into the executive director position.
Right. And I hear you also had quite a bit of experience with the Robert Weber Institute of Worship Studies. So that took you through some deep studies and, of course, led
Did.
towards
Yeah,
writing a book. Sounds fascinating.
it did. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a foundation for that. I actually wasn't even a writer before then, but doing doctoral work and having to do the thesis and all that thing, I love that. Started blogging, and then based on that, then wrote the book.
Love it. Well, I've had a chance to look at this book. I'll just show everyone here. There we go. Better Sundays Begin on Monday. That's kind of what we're talking about today. I like the format of this book because it's not, I mean, hey, maybe it's made for me. The chapters aren't like 46 pages long.
That's right.
We're talking like 1.5 pages. So if you can't get through that, then you've got to work on, paying attention a little bit. But 52 short chapters. But what I've noticed that each chapter really you don't have a lot of time. So you sort of dive deep really quickly and go like, okay, let's talk about something serious and meaningful and reflective here. I really like that approach. An overall theme, and let's just talk about this a little bit, is just this whole idea of evaluating Sundays, the Sunday past, rather than just pressing on to the next one.
Sure.
We think it's easy, but sometimes it's hard to look back on the thing we did and be constructively critical of ourselves and even of others that we care about. That's a difficult thing, isn't it?
It is. And, as you think about that, it's difficult to evaluate like that because as soon as we get through with one Sunday, it's time for another Sunday.
Yeah.
And so we don't often take the time, but I think it's valuable time to take. In fact, I heard a quote recently, and I would attribute it to who actually quoted it, but I don't know. And it was related to ministry in general. And they said Sunday morning or Sundays for us in ministry is like giving birth, only to realize on Monday morning that you're pregnant again. And so it's Sunday comes every week, and it just, we don't have a break in between there. But the idea of evaluation, I mean, most of us evaluate our worship, and the evaluation is usually nothing fell apart, so we're good until the next Sunday. If something did fall apart, we kind of fix that, and then we move on.
Yeah.
And so we often do those post-mortem evaluations, but we also need to do those pre-mortem evaluations, where that's that prospective hindsight, which we're imagining what could happen ahead of time too. And one way to do that is to think bigger beyond just what happened the day before, but also evaluate what is potentially coming up. And I think we also need to evaluate not just the music, because we all know that music is not the only aspect of worship.
Yeah.
We must evaluate every aspect of that worship service. And here's the hard part, including the sermon. And sometimes pastors don't like that part of it.
Right.
But I think if we're going to really evaluate wholly of that worship service, we need to evaluate every element of that service, including transitions, including even announcements and those kind of things, to ask if they are actually helping us and helping them, our congregation, be more participative in their worship.
Yeah. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about like the mindset of being a leader and establishing a culture of healthy evaluation. Like, let's just talk about that a little bit, because I know I'm just thinking for myself when I've led worship. I mean, let's be honest. I loved it when people came up to me after the service and were like, Ryan, that was awesome. I just met the Lord. It was so great. I loved that song. And then it went into the next song. It was my favorite. I mean, all that, the band sounded great. So I'm human, right? I just kind of like feed off of the positives. But then as a leader, how can I help establish a culture that isn't like, okay, and now I'm going to like pick you apart, every little thing you said, every,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So establishing a culture that's of healthy, constructive self-evaluation, and what perhaps a mindset that a leader has to have for that.
Yeah, that's a great question, great lead in for this. So, we all know that evaluation is already happening in the hallways and parking
Yeah.
lots and restaurants after the services. And some of those that are evaluating, they come and tell us positive things. Some of them also tell us negative things. And sometimes I think we're afraid of evaluation. That evaluation always seems like, hey, let's just pick apart the things that didn't work. But evaluation is also affirming those things that are working.
Yeah.
And so if it's much like those of us that grew up playing sports or something like that, the next day after the game, we would gather together as a team and we would break down that game film and we would walk through that. And the coach would talk about,
Right.
hey, you missed a block there, but you didn't there. And so they would highlight those things. So what if that works for sports, why couldn't it work for what we do for so much, something that's so much more important than that? Because if it's already happening, I want to be more preemptive and be on the front end of that so they can maybe head off some of those catastrophes or some of those negative things that occur before they actually occur.
Yeah.
And I think by evaluating, now what it does require is a high level of trust.
Right.
And it requires some vulnerability, and it requires, and that trust has to be evident. I also think it requires not just those of us that are the upfront leaders to actually do the evaluation. I think it also requires enlisting some of those other people in your congregation, some of those even not musicians or tech people, so they can evaluate from a perspective of the average church member. So they're asking questions and responding to things that we get used to as musicians that they don't understand, but they bring a perspective potentially of that evaluation. So I love the idea, and I talk about this in the book, of developing an evaluative team of some kind. You can call it whatever you want to, but a team that meets regularly to evaluate what happened either the day or two before, but also to evaluate what may be happening in the coming weeks, that preemptive, that pre-mortem evaluation on the front side, so that you can maybe head off some of those things that could occur if you haven't thought through them ahead of time. So it does require trust, but if you love each other more than you love getting your own way, and you love the body of Christ and the best for that, then sometimes it can be brutal. But if you trust each other, you realize that there's no ulterior, it's not a personal ideological thing. It's we're all trying to be better at our worship each week.
Right.
And so it does sometimes it takes some learning and growth pain through that, where sometimes it seems painful. But again, if you affirm as much as you criticize, then much like you said, Ryan, we love when people come and tell us how good things were, but we don't really like that one out of
Yeah.
100 that comes and says, "Hey, I didn't really like that."
Yeah, for sure. Well, I do think that it's important for us as leaders to model receiving constructive feedback well, and it's sort of like sets the tone for other people, so that when feedback is given around the table, there is a tone that's kind of set for that. So that's really good. And another thing I just think, in favor of your book is the book kind of brings a bit of outside context and as sort of a systematic approach to it, so that it's like, let's not just I don't know, dissect all 52 things that went on Sunday. How about this Sunday we're going to talk about this particular topic? Let's maybe all read about that particular item and then reflect on that kind of together more generically, because you're not going to change a cruise ship overnight. It's not on one Sunday that you're going to fix everything or make everything better. But this is something that, well, of course, with 52 chapters, that's probably going to take a year at least to really thoughtfully go through a lot of things. So why
Yeah,
don't we
or
dive
even
in?
more than that. Yeah,
Yeah,
even more than that. Some of those, if you need to spread those out, and they're not chronological, so you can pick and choose, or you can go through in order, and then there's some resources then at the back too to
yeah,
help your team, and even beyond the chapters. So yeah, the intent was for each chapter to be standalone, and then each chapter then has some follow-up questions for your team to ask of your context based on what you read. And you're not going to
yeah,
agree with everything in there, but
yeah.
that's also a great discussion about why you don't agree with that too.
Right on, right on. How about if we take a little bit of time? I've got the book open and I've got a few chapters. I thought we would just sample a few topics. And
Okay.
so the first one you called Creating Worship Tourists. So this is where you
Tourists.
want to
Yeah.
kind of start out the whole thing, is talking about tourists versus
Yeah.
travelers and having that kind of
Yeah.
sense of evaluation. Tell me what you had in mind with that, setting the tone for the whole book.
Yeah, sure. So the whole theme of that chapter is the idea of is participative rather than passive
Yeah,
worshipers.
right.
And so, how do we, as a worship team, how do we ensure that our congregation are participating rather than being just passive observers? So, there's a difference between a tourist and a traveler. A tourist is one of those that they're trying to get to the destination. A traveler enjoys the journey to the destination as much as they do the destination. So, those differences between those two definitions, many of us, when we're going on vacation, are tourists. We're trying to get to Florida to get to the beach. We
Yeah,
don't care what we see on the way there. We just want to get to that ultimate destination. And the traveler is the one that's going to stop at every rest stop they see, or every roadside park, and they're going to enjoy that actually journey to get there. So we, as worship teams, sometimes we don't even realize that our congregation is not participating because we are doing it and leading for them. One of the great things that happened during COVID was we started, those of us that weren't already, started streaming our services and recording those services, which is also a great tool. Now that you're doing that, don't just stream them, but go back as a team and actually break down that game film and use that resource. But even a step beyond that, what if you actually then even recorded your congregation during the worship service, and really just observe and see if they are participating? We need to evaluate their level of participation in that too. So sometimes we, as worship leaders, inadvertently are creating those worship tourists by doing all of the things for them instead of making sure they
yeah,
have joined that conversation with
yeah.
us. And so that's the whole theme of that chapter, of those two differences. And there's several different illustrations of the difference between travelers and tourists that kind of bring that about. And then again, there are then follow-up questions to say, hey, how are we doing with this? Or,
Right,
or do we even know? Are we
right.
even asking those questions, whether they feel like, are they even singing when we gather together? Do
Yeah,
we even know if they're singing?
yeah.
Those kind of questions to
Yeah, I
follow
could
up.
totally see, a team of leaders or worship planners or your team or choir just having discussion, and like I say, there's some team discussions at the end of each chapter. Like an example, How can we move our congregation from passive spectators to active participants, and just having that open discussion of, hey, does anybody have some ideas? No idea is a bad idea here. What are some small, little, subtle ways that can just trigger a
Hmm.
little more active participation? So I'm just trying to give us
Yeah,
some.
and really there,
Go ahead.
sure. And there's a follow up in the appendix. There's a questionnaire that really does relate to that chapter some, and it's an internal evaluation kind of thing, and some questions that you can ask, or ideas that you can
Yeah,
do as a group to try to figure out where you are, which might even include putting some of your team members in the congregation in different places when they're not on the platform to kind of judge those people around them,
yeah,
to observe that they are participating. And then I said also then recording them to see where they are.
right,
And that even comes to the place of having people in your congregation that are intentionally evaluating our language on the platform. Are we using archaic language that people don't resonate? If we're going to get them to
right,
participate, they need to understand what we're saying and singing.
right.
And so, if there's some things that they're missing because we're using language that's not familiar to them,
Yeah,
then they're gonna check out.
yeah,
Or we all struggle with this as worship leaders: are the ranges appropriate for the congregation that God's entrusted to us?
yeah,
And so, if we get out there and the men drop out because the line gets too high for them, then we need to understand that then we're encouraging then
yeah,
tourists
yeah.
when that occurs, and they're just watching us do it instead of actually participating.
We don't all have high voices like, Tomlin and Chris Tomlin and Phil Wickham, some of those great tenors, right? So
Yeah, you can
there
tell
you
by
go.
my voice that that's something
Yeah,
that
yeah,
resonates with me. Yeah.
for sure. Hey, just skipping ahead here to chapter 7. I like this one, Dear Non-Singing Pastor. So you're even
Yeah.
including some language here and some topics that it's not just all about the worship team, it's about the full ministry team, and there's even some encouragement here for, the senior pastors who don't sing on a
Yeah.
Sunday to see that they're a
Yeah.
part of it.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah,
and and I believe that, and I know this is not always possible, but if it's possible for a worship leader, I think one of the primary worship leaders in the church is a senior pastor. And
yeah,
so that chapter was written specifically. So it's like an open letter to them. And the whole gist of that chapter, without giving it all away, is when the senior pastor sits on the front row and does not sing during the congregational singing, he's saying to the congregation, this doesn't have value, and gives the opinion then that whatever happens before he gets up is actually a warm up band for the main event kind of feel.
yeah,
And so if he's there studying his sermon notes before, during the music part of the worship, before he gets up to preach, he's indicating that everybody else there, whether intends that or not, he's indicating to them that what's going on right now doesn't have that much value until I actually get up there
right.
and speak. And it also gives the appearance, if he's still studying his notes during the song set, that he's not prepared. It's almost like a freshman cramming for a final exam
Yeah,
right before they have to go take it. And so that open letter is just to encourage them to join the congregation in full-throated singing and be that model for the rest of the
yeah.
congregation about participative worship.
It's amazing. That first row, that first pew is actually almost like an extension of the stage because people see what that guy is doing in that front row. If he's just, distracted or head down or whatever, or fully engaged and with the hands, with your body, with your voice, it's
Hmm.
impacting. It's culture
Yes.
defining. Wouldn't you say that? Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that because people are looking to him
Yeah.
as a spiritual leader in their church, just like they look for the people on the platform, and especially I think of young people that are looking for an excuse not to participate, and if they see that lead pastor is not, that
Yeah.
gives them an out not to participate too.
Yeah. Very good. Skipping along about 40 chapters. Now we're into, the 40th week of the year. A letter to younger me. Something just interesting I wanted to share with you is I happen to be now going back to the church where I was the worship pastor for 5 or 6 years. It's actually the church where I started PraiseCharts out of and then had 25 years of various life and ministry, and had kids and raised kids. Now they're adults getting married, and so it's almost like as I was reading this, I'm thinking about myself now as a 52-year-old, thinking about when I was 25 up there on the stage, and if I could write a letter to myself or how I think differently now. And so I thought it was just kind of a really good perspective that you had to just have that kind of whole life perspective. What were some of the things that you remember coming out of this chapter?
Yeah, so that whole chapter is kind of the idea, just like in golf terms. If I had a mulligan, if I had a do-over,
Yeah, right.
what would I do differently? If I could go back and all of us made mistakes, and some of those mistakes have surfaced, and they've helped us grow too, even in those mistakes. And when we've had failures as much as successes, they've helped us grow in ministry. And so some of those we shouldn't trade in, but if a lot of those had to do with areas like I would spend more time drinking coffee with senior adults because growing up, I had a guy in our church that he seemed to show up. And our rehearsal was on a Wednesday night. He would seem to show up at rehearsal on a Wednesday afternoon. And I still had 4 hours of preparation, only had 3 hours to get it done. And he wanted to come and just hang out and drink coffee with me. And in the moment, I thought it was a distraction, but I realized how much that was a divine appointment for me.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to invest in me, and he was a guy that would he didn't really like some of the stuff we were doing, but he liked me, and because I had a relationship with him, and he was willing to go there because he trusted me, because I was willing just to sit and drink coffee and shoot the breeze with him. So I'd drink more coffee with senior adults, and I would also I talked a little bit about this on the travel and tourist thing, but I would enjoy the journey more. Sometimes I was so focused on getting to the destination of an event or a pageant or a program or a seasonal event. I was so focused on getting there that I left people in my wake actually to get there too. And so I would spend more time focusing on relationships than just the end event.
Yeah.
And I would also spend more time on theology than musicology.
Right.
I was always trying to get right notes, but right relationships and theological foundation, some of those things that in my ministry responsibilities with our convention, as people are looking for a new place of ministry or feeling they have to go to a new place of ministry, it rarely has to do with their musical skills or their preaching skills or student ministry. It always comes back to relationships and leadership.
Yeah.
And so as a young leader, I would spend musicianship's important, excellence is important. I would though spend more time on deepening those relationships, because people are going to remember how you lead them off the platform a lot longer than they're going to remember how you lead them from the platform. So those are some of the, just a kind of a thumbnail of some of those things in that chapter.
Yeah, it's great. And I think it's good for people to see that when we're talking about evaluating Sundays, this is not necessarily just talking about evaluating like the transition from song 2 to song 3 and you missed that chord or you played too loud, or these are topics that are often much deeper, much more profound, much more like you could enter in as a community of leaders and go, I think I could grow in this, like, and have that kind of spirit of conversation, especially leaders. Just speaking to you, is if you take the lead of going, I think I can come up higher in this, it sets the tone for your team to also be like, well, if he's being humble and vulnerable and open,
absolutely,
like that, we can also do this. And then you kind of create a culture of healthy progression, right? Where we take time to talk about some of these deeper, substantial things. I was just wanting to give a bit of, a scan through that some of these topics are quite practical, but some of them are very much more profound and deep and need some time to be, like this last one, and this one, I feel like this really starts to go deep and tender and might need a few more weeks. But you talk about playing hurt and just the emotional, fragile state of some of us as worship leaders when we're living our lives. And I mean, we all know we're not perfect, and sometimes we have an argument with our wife, or we have someone we're not getting along with, or we're feeling depressed or anxious or I've got so many memories like that in my
Yeah,
journey, and I
yeah,
just feel like I want to come out and say it's okay. Like we need you
hmm
and your pain, right? Give
yeah,
us a little bit of what you're
yeah,
seeing in the chapter.
yeah. So in that whole, I use the illustration there, playing herd of a sports
Yeah,
illustration too, because sometimes people in sports will play with injuries if as long as it's not debilitating. If they can continue to play, they're going to play hurt
yeah,
every weekend because they want to keep their position. And we've created a culture like that in ministry where we even have to fake it in
right.
order to make sure that we don't lose our position. And so
Yeah,
we're not willing to be vulnerable on the platform and say to a congregation that we too are struggling, we're hurting, we're walking through some hard seasons. I think if not in that chapter, one of the other chapters, maybe I can't remember if it was in that chapter or not. I use the illustration when my wife and I had a miscarriage when we were
mm,
we'd been married for 10 years and we'd gone through all the infertility kind of things, and we had a miscarriage. And I, because of the season that time, this has been 30 years ago, but we didn't talk about things like that in ministry and church, and you didn't definitely didn't show that on the platform. So that happened in the middle of the week, and I still had to lead worship on Sunday. I didn't feel any of the or believe any of the songs I was actually leading that Sunday, but I had to fake it like I was.
right.
So the focus of that chapter is that we as leaders need to have the freedom to be able to express some of that hurt too. Now, it's not an every Sunday kind of thing, but we need to let the congregation know too, because I think that transparency actually would help them understand. Because some people come every Sunday and they think these people must not be feeling what I'm feeling,
Yeah,
and so we need to help those people, and we as leaders understand that great cloud of witnesses sometimes needs to surround us and prop us up and help us.
yeah,
In ministry, we're not immune from depression and family problems and financial issues and all things that everybody else is. And it's difficult too for us as leaders if we don't have the resolve, spiritually, emotionally, physically, as leaders. If we don't have that resolve ourselves, how can we expect to lead people to a place we no longer have that resolve to go ourselves? And so I think one way to do that is to be more open about those and create a culture that's a safe place to do that.
right.
And the congregation then sometimes needs us to surround us, and we can honestly say, "I'm struggling this week because of." And
Yeah,
and I would say this too: if our diet is only happy songs, we're also saying to our congregation too that this is just a happy place.
right.
So whatever you're feeling,
Yeah,
either you shouldn't feel it, or at least you shouldn't feel it here. And I think we've got to convey to them too that sometimes hurt is a part lament.
yeah,
You look in the Psalms, and more than half the Psalms are Psalms of lament. Sometimes we need to tell our congregations, and we need to model that. We have a God who is big enough to handle those complaints.
mm-hmm,
When we say, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
mm-hmm,
I mean, that's a profound act of worship too.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow, so good. There's so much breadth and width in the topics that you cover here, over 52. So this is Better Sundays begin on Monday, 52 chapters. Great for your team. And thank you, David, for investing your heart and your life into this. I think it's a profound, great resource and a great combination, actually. I mean, that book and Praise Charts, we go together like, peanut butter and jam,
Absolutely.
right? So you need
That's
to
right. We
use it.
talked about, yeah.
And I
Yeah,
know you have experience using praise charts in your ministry years,
I
orchestras,
do.
choirs. You know the full gamut of bringing everybody on stage together. It's a lot to carry, but then we also
Yeah.
need to kind of think about the why and the how and where we're going together. So it's a great
Yeah, and
marriage. And
thank you, Ryan, for that resource. That's
yeah,
been in fact, I've got a friend that texted me, and he knows who he is.
oh yeah.
Texted me, and he said, you have arrived now that you're talking with Ryan on Praise
Oh,
Charts. So at least
no, I
you
don't
got
think
one
so.
fan at least out there, Ryan.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks to him and thanks to all of you. I hope that you'll find practical, encouraging resources. Certainly at Praise Charts, we're trying to, equip you with the kind of music that really fits well with your church and then to think deeply and profoundly about what you're doing every week with a resource like this. We'll put the link in the show notes and
Thank
certainly
you.
promote this as a very practical resource. So thank you, David. Thanks to all of you who are joining in and here with us live or here with us just listening to this recording. I hope this becomes a great resource to you. So there we are, Ryan and David from PraiseCharts Live. We'll see you next time.